All right. Sorry, everybody. I'm just doing a mic check. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? Doing a mic check. We're going to be talking about transition finance during tonight's APAC Markets in Motion program. We'll be discussing the unique energy, market, and policy dynamics that are shaping Asia's journey to decarbonization. Tonight, we'll focus in on capital. Okay.
Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Our program will begin now.
ดีโหมดง่ายด่างหอกโหมดสางโคน A day of travel can bring a basket of wisdom
Tak kenal, maka tak sayang. You can't love what you don't know.
Build a deep connection Get to know more people supplier customer authorities
And most importantly, you have to meet them face to face.
เข้าเมืองตาหลิวต้องหลิวตาตาม
Kenapa ASEAN? Karena ASEAN adalah rumah saya. Untuk itu, mari kita berkolaborasi bersama.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Transition Finance, APAC Markets in Motion. Tonight's program is kicking off our 4th annual Bloomberg Sustainable Business Summit here in Singapore, and we're thrilled to be back in region. There is no place quite like Asia Pacific with this unique mix of energy, policy, and market dynamics that are shaping how countries and companies alike decarbonize. Tonight, we're going to be following the money, as many of our conversations around sustainability and climate tend to do. But before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank our fantastic Summit Advisor Bangkok Bank for making tonight's program possible. And now, let's dive in for a conversation on mobilizing capital while balancing innovation and integrity. Please join me in welcoming Oyi Chu, CEO of Climate Impact X, and Kavitha Menon, Director of the Singapore Sustainable Finance Association, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Ishika Mukherjee.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a good day and a good evening. Thank you very much for joining us today. Hoping to dive into a very exciting session here on transition finance. I mean, scientists are saying we've blown past the 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming target, above, well, pre-industrial levels. And we're a far ways off from culling the emissions that we'd like to by 2030. I think we need to cut, as the world needs to cut 40% or more than that to reach even close to the net zero target of 2050, right? All this is happening in the backdrop of, new labels being introduced in the transition space. But I was just looking at the numbers, and transition bonds and loans have together netted just about $45 billion since 2019 in total, which is peanuts, right? Which is nothing, and it's mostly led by Japanese issuances because of their GX transformation program. So, tonight we're going to talk about all the trends and the opportunities and risks we're seeing in this space. Kavita, I want to start with you. Speaking of the 1.5 degree target, right? If that's not working and if that's not realistic anymore, how should countries and companies think about their transition pathways? What's a realistic number to have there for a baseline and for internal carbon pricing? I think Temasek is in the room, and they're using 1.8 degrees for one of their three scenarios when they think about carbon pricing. So, what do you think? What's a good number?
So I can see that Ishika is you're clearly going for the juggler at the start. It's about, I'm not the climate scientist, and I feel that a lot of people in the room who may be better qualified than me to answer this. But kind of going back to the question that we've overshot, and I mean 2024 was the sort of first year where we've shot past that 1.5. And when you're looking at Paris Agreement, these are long-term averages, right? This is not just 1 year that we're talking about. But just in terms of where at current sort of trajectory and looking at where the current climate pledges are, most likely you're looking like a 2 degree to 3 degree scenario in a base case if we do not get our act together. And what does that mean? Increasingly, we are going to be living in a world which is climate impaired. And we're already starting to see effects of that day-to-day basis. If I look at numbers, right, according to Munich Re, last year, climate-related losses globally stood at around $320 billion. And out of that, 140 billion was actually insured. And this was the third highest losses that the insurance sector has ever seen. So all of these will have ripple and trickle-down effects in terms of the larger business environment that we all operate in. And I kind of want to flag, I would say, 2 or 3 early warning signals and indicators that we should be mindful of. One, I think insurance. Nobody understands risk better than them. What are they saying in terms of your premiums? Where are they maybe decreasing their insurance coverages, and potentially where are they retreating from markets, and not willing to underwrite risk. Second is supply chain disruptions, especially climate change impact in terms of whether it's resource availability or shortages. And third thing, I can see Spencer sitting right in front of me, but anecdotally, we are seeing service level agreements in areas like data centers, where who bears that risk of downtime, which is caused by climate changes? Is that the service provider or is that the client? So these are sort of early warning signals that you need to be mindful of. And so net, whatever you see on the headlines, ultimately, this is a material business risk. And just borrowing our climate ambassador's words, nature is ultimately going to call the shots. So businesses can be prepared for an orderly transition or can be forced to do in a disorderly manner.
Are you seeing businesses in Singapore actually start to use that 2-degree scenario, or are you saying that's probably where we're headed?
So Singapore Asia taxonomy actually is based on 1.5 degree pathways still. And these are early indicators, where, in terms of transactions facilitating or basically aligned to taxonomy, we don't see that many. And we are increasingly watching where there is that call for, I would say, locally contextualized pathways, be it at a region or sector specific, and where there is leeway. But going back to it, ultimately we are also kind of governed by what some of net zero standards talk about it. And it would take engagement for them to sort of think through where the local realities lie for these standards.
Cool. Oi, let me come to you. So in the US, tariffs is the biggest piece of news. In Europe, them simplifying the ESG regulations, and for our world, I'd say, is them simplifying the ESG regulations, right? And I think CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the EU deforestation regulations are two key pieces of legislation that affect Asian suppliers. How have you seen activity on CIX around those themes, especially of CBAM? Are you seeing Asian businesses actually doing more with buying carbon offsets right now?
So I think that's a really interesting question. I think, first of all, CBAM impacts probably our neighbors more than Singapore itself. But just from our conversations with corporates, it feels like it's currently still an education process, not really an implementation yet. I think the implementation is 2026 onwards, and of course, the different sectors that get impacted over time. And it will depend on a few things, right? If you have a local sort of compliance that you're already paying, then you can offset that. Right. So there are many mechanisms in place, which I think corporates are still trying to struggle to understand. And what we're seeing on our platform is an increasing number of requests for information, a request for sort of understanding how this is going to play out. But I would say net, and of course we want to support our regional partners as well. But I would expect the Indonesia and Vietnam would be much more impacted because of the amount of exports that are going into EU. And I think what's going to force that conversation is also that EU right now is trading at about, I think, 70 to 80 euros. And so how is that going to normalize between what ASEAN is? Because we have a very, very nascent market. The Singapore, even if you talk about Singapore, carbon tax is still very new. There's nothing that equalizes yet. So what are the mechanisms that will support that? I think are yet to be played out in the next few years. It's very, very early days.
Yeah. Do you expect CIX to play a role in that in terms of either pricing or?
We definitely, so one of the biggest desires, objectives of CIX is to create a platform that has transparent pricing. I think, we need to pull our regional partners together to make that happen. And that's still quite a lot of ways to go yet, but that certainly is where we think the world should be at some point.
Okay, coming to the opportunities and...
Ishika, if I may build on that, the deforestation part, I think one fact about that is that it puts a spotlight on nature-related issues for this part of the world, which is critical. Otherwise, it kind of gets sidelined when you talk about climate change. And so for that matter, even if the cost of compliance, it does add to sort of that supplier tracking and the traceability and the due diligence statements. For the first time, you have something which is putting a spotlight on nature-related issues in the supply chain of, say, palm oil and the others. Where already I would say the roundtables have done significant amount of work, but it is increasingly that climate nature nexus where we are looking at and where we are doing a lot of work on.
What are you hoping, where are you hoping to get with that?
So first is like disclosures, like for them to actually map out their supply chain and understand, like, trace it, understand where are those intersections happening with deforestation. And then comes accountability and, like, how do you sort of ensure that, like, that what they say is actually, it's true. And second, for us, it's also like in terms of how does this impact their availability of like raising finance, and where some of these metrics kind of become a key overlay for how like the financial institutions think about like, financing these projects in the future.
So I mean, there is obviously the different lens between EUDR and CBAM, because CBAM is a lot more sort of carbon pricing related. DR is a bit more nature related. So the constituencies are also very varied here as we talk about, and how, as a region, we react. It's not just one piece of work here, there are actually multiple pieces of work. And even when you look at CBAM, for example, it's not just about the carbon credit space, is also the production processes and how that is happening. So, a lot of conversations today go beyond carbon credits. Actually, we start talking about, I wouldn't say like hydrogen and ammonia, and how does the green hydrogen piece and the green ammonia piece feed into production, renewable energy, how does that all feed into productions to support that? And again, sort of is multifaceted. It's actually quite a complex problem to start with.
So are we going to see green hydrogen futures and green ammonia futures trading?
I can only wish. I think the market there is still very, very nascent in that the whole book and claim system, the regulations need to be clear. How are you claiming green? What are the technical specifications? What are the different production facilities? Where are they from? Can we split the environmental attribute and trade it? I think those are still very early stage. We obviously, CIX is of the view that definitely has to be the case to sort of stimulate financing into the space. It's a bit like sustainable aviation fuels, right? How are we trying to bring demand to the table is, having SAF certs in the market. That's a space that we're looking closely as well, because we want to scale. We think that scaling these markets will help support the broader industrial sort of decarbonization initiatives.
Yep, and as you mentioned, it's very varied, right? That brings me to the question of whether we even need a transition label at this point for products, or is this going to be business as usual for companies going ahead, or does the government, do regulators need to drive that, do investors need to drive that? And if we do need a label, where are the opportunities in Asia today?
Should I?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
The label essentially, like at the project or activity level, is where, like, Singapore Asia taxonomy or ASEAN taxonomy kind of gives you that guardrails, right, in terms of what it takes to be classified as a transition finance activity. But we are also looking at it increasingly from that top-down entity level transition plan, and clearly, executing that like over the time frame. And there is that sort of, like, I wouldn't say tension, but like at least like that ability to switch, which is the best sort of proposition for a corporate, because like at an activity level, for each activity, if you're going through that endorsement process, getting in third-party verification, assurance services to ensure that like you are meeting the TSCs, and kind of like, then claiming to be like green compliant or transition compliant, what is that upside that you ultimately get from like, from going through that effort? From an entity level, we feel that it gives an overall, it becomes part of like a corporate, strategy, like overall business transformation. And then it basically means that anything that they do in that regard, in a general corporate purposes, like kind of aids into that transition finance. So labeling to that extent may not be really required to facilitate transition in the first place.
But are you seeing certain sectors starting to raise more money using the transition label, or even if they don't call it transition finance, more towards the aim of reducing emissions than others here in Asia?
I would say that like there is a hesitance in sharing information about like, what transactions are transition. It more so from a bottom-up, activity level, if it aligns with the taxonomy of its referencing a taxonomy, I think the guardrails are quite clear. But when it comes to transition plans, there are a number of frameworks which exist. When you translate that into actual like, principles like that you use, there is a bit of like a difference in how transition is interpreted in different jurisdictions. There is no common definition of it. So I think there is a bit of like let's do the work. We don't have to call attention to it. Let's start like helping our corporate clients with, setting up those corporate decarbonization plans. Let's help them like, get up their capacity curve, like which clearly the financial institutions in Singapore, like and in ASEAN have been ahead of the game there, and kind of get them up the curve to kind of do this on their own.
So transition hushing, like you have green hushing. Are you seeing that happen more?
For sure, I'm thinking that it is.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's not great, but yeah, sure. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, you said the word green hushing, so I kind of have to, I have to step in there. It is very interesting, right? Because outside of transition finance in the carbon space, and I think the problem with green hushing or transition hushing is that it doesn't help the financial system mobilize capital. Because it's kind of stuck, right? If a big corporate wants to buy carbon credits and it doesn't want to sort of tell the world about it, and the banks that want to come in want to do some due diligence, like how is that facilitated, right? And if you don't facilitate finance into, doesn't matter, right? Transition finance or carbon credits, then the financing doesn't move into the right projects and help to stimulate or help to bring down cost of capital over time. So it will forever remain a high-cost endeavor. And the problem with high-cost endeavor, everybody has a board to explain to. And, how do you explain that, I've just borrowed the money at a huge amount of interest rate to buy something that is a bit sort of nebulous. So I think the more that we think about standardization and the more that governments give air cover, doesn't matter whether it's transition finance or it's carbon credits, the recognition of that will, I think, bring to light some of the activities that are happening. And I think the more that we do that, then the more that we support the financial system that needs to mobilize finance, right? It's sort of like right now the whole critique about whether the developed nations are already mobilizing enough capital in developing nations to help them with a whole bunch of, whether it's nature or biodiversity and all of that good stuff. But so I think the word green hushing just really sort of grates at the moment because people are doing good things and they are continuing. So what we're seeing is that corporates who are really, really committed to this space, and they've continued to be committed. I mean, even if Trump says quite a lot of negative things, and people come to me and say, well, Trump's been, sort of saying, well, we shouldn't be focused on this, but yet the corporate world knows that it needs to support this. And I think we just all need to come together and be a lot more definitive and articulate about the strategies.
I mean, you said cost of capital, right? So when it comes to green products, you have the greenium that at least used to exist and still exists in certain parts of the world, so it helps the issuer, right? Do you have examples of where having that transition label actually helps in terms of cost of capital, and what metrics does it actually help?
I mean, we just had a valuation conversation in another room, and I can see Mervyn kind of nodding there. Cost of capital, going back to the roots of it. I mean, the fact of the matter is, based on IEA's research, cost of capital for the same project, same clean energy project in the developing market, it's 2 times higher than what it is in developed markets. And if you're looking at the delta, 2/3 is actually from country and currency specific risk.
Right.
It's not even project specific risk, right? So what you need to be looking at is systemic solutions that address some of these problems, right? So whether if it's for currency, I mean, hedging solutions are quite expensive. So how can we offset this by local currency, capital mobilization efforts? On the country, where can insurance really come and play a role around that political risk cover and other matters? So I think it's important to kind of look at some of the structural barriers that's limiting that flow of finance into these projects and doesn't make them bankable. So there are few mechanisms that we are prioritizing at SSFA, through the carbon markets workstream itself, to really unpack that. In the case of carbon financing, which we just touched, we realized that a lot of risk, once you define it, what are the risk mitigation mechanisms that exist? So in some cases, you need to create a market. So for carbon insurance, it's something that it's still far and few in terms of players who are already operating in that space. So there's a bit of market making, there's a bit of capacity building, and there's a bit of really thinking very structurally about what are the systemic solutions.
I think, some of the work that SSFA is driving is very critical to this, because what we want to get is to pull together the financial institutions who are all good members of SSFA to put our brains together to sort of think about how do we support project financing for carbon. As we just talked about, all these aspects of risk management are still relatively new, right? I mean, insurance for one is relatively young and relatively new. But then how do we then say, well, how do you diversify, or how do you mitigate risk? Because a lot of the projects are also quite small, and then obviously countries that have risk premiums that are a lot higher. So how do we then allocate capital in the right way to support that? And some of that is also policy clarity in different countries. You have obviously different. So how does let's say a consortium of Asian banks deploy capital across the region? And with the different policies that are happening right now, how do we harmonize that so that the capital can flow through easily? And of course, besides currency, the sort of issues that we need to solve. But there's definitely a number of constituencies that want to see this happen, and we see a lot of support for that.
So carbon insurance, right?
Not just carbon insurance, but debt financing. How do the banks support that? So there's a lot of equity investors in the space, and how do we then help to manage that capital stack by bringing in different capital flows and capital providers? Could be catalytic, it could be philanthropic, sort of where does that stack sit so that we then mobilize more projects and we get more supply out of this region.
I'm also wondering what the next catalysts are for carbon markets, right? Globally, there's been a crisis of confidence, to say the least. But where do you see the biggest catalysts going ahead?
So the space is evolving very rapidly. I would say, on top of what's happening in the voluntary space, governments are increasingly leaning in. So there's a lot of geopolitical lens to this as well. I'll give you examples. Each country, or countries realize, or governments realize that they themselves don't have enough capital to save the world, as it were. And what they're doing is mobilizing the convergence of the voluntary carbon markets with the compliance lens. And it could be something like carbon tax, in the way Singapore is expressing it. It could be ETS. So I think Indonesia has a fledgling one. I think Thailand would like to pass that law. China has its own ETS. So really, many mechanisms that the government is sort of governments are utilizing that. So that is one big trend. The second big trend is CORSIA for airlines. At the moment, it's a very good initiative, and I think the airlines are very focused on what's happening in this phase and the next phase. There is an issue with supply, so there is a need to work with governments, not only just on the projects, but the ability to get corresponding adjustments so that it can be applied to aviation. And I think those would be very big catalysts for the space, because CORSIA itself is a very scalable market, and there is a certain sort of, I wouldn't say sort of, so it has a certain sort of size and weight that the aviation sector is really going to drive. And there are some other good things that are happening. ICBCM is coming up with the CCP, the Core Carbon Principles sort of label, which is sort of pushing everybody to think about a meta standard across the different registries. So there are many interesting Article 6. Obviously, there were big announcements in Baku last year. We're expecting more announcements in Belém this year. And really, how do then the countries mobilize not just the implementation of 6.2, which Singapore is very actively doing, but also 6.4, which is creating a much more fungible and a much more global market. And I think that will also catalyze some of the work that's being done. Now, what's really important is kind of the underlying sort of thinking around projects and the development of those sort of quite similar. It's just sort of what do you apply that to? So the work can't stop. It's just what is going to be the next most practical, economical pathway that developers have to choose to obviously get a return out of their investments.
Kavita, I'm just going to come to you, and I'm conscious of time, but I wanted to know where do you see the supply pipeline coming in from for CORSIA credits, which you brought up? Which countries are going to drive the supply?
I think there are a few big the a number of projects that are sort of CORSIA aligned. I think the biggest question is which country is ready to issue letters of authorization for corresponding adjustments.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I can't give, if I had that guess,
I see.
if I could guess, I wouldn't be. Part of the issue is many developing countries are building that infrastructure to support that.
Yep.
And so it will take time for that to happen. So we'll probably need a bit of patience.
And do you think we'll see a unified ASEAN carbon market? The Minister of Environment.
Vida and I, that's our dream.
I didn't feed that question to her. It kind of came very organically. No, thank you for asking. It's something that we signed at COP last year. We're very excited about it. It's a memorandum of collaboration that SSFA has signed with our counterpart carbon market associations in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. And the ambition here, it is a private sector. It's a private sector grouping. And the ambition here is to really create that harmonized, interoperable carbon market. And we are still in pretty early stages. I have my SteerCo representative sitting right next to me on it. So we are still kind of
Seems like a Fed question. Yeah, go ahead. What's the timeline on it? What can we expect?
So I think the primary messaging around this is we want to ensure that we're not creating further fragmentation in the market, and there is that linkage to international meta standards whether it's your ICVCM, CCP, CORSIA labels, and really enabling that sort of free flow of financing for carbon projects. Because ultimately, we as a net sort of demand center sitting out here, how do we ensure that the quality and the integrity of credits which are coming from the region kind of is fit for purpose for Singapore?
Are you hoping to have it ready by, say, 2028, when everyone's going to be rushing towards that 2030 target?
I would hope so.
Earlier than that?
I think, the ASEAN is an amazing region. I mean, you think about the diversity of the projects that could be developed and are developing across the region. It's so rich in potential that Singapore were very, very happy, grateful. We have a carbon services hub that is growing by the day. We have a lot of technical knowledge and capacity that's now growing in Singapore, and a lot of that is leaning into the various countries to develop projects. There's consulting, there's advisory, there's all sorts of stuff that's happening. It's super exciting. And we really want to see us act as a region because we think that will make us, obviously, rather than sort of fragmented different markets, which obviously, makes it difficult for global buyers to then come to the region and, where do I go? Malaysia, Indonesia, could we just sort of operate as a region? I think that would be really exciting. We do think, as we talk about 2030, that there's not enough time. The action has to start now, because if you think about projects, you don't grow a tree in a day, So it's not like corporates wake up in 2030 and say, hey, guess what? I need to buy some credits. Where do I go? So the investment, the equity investment, the debt capital needs to go into projects now, and it needs to develop over sort of 2-3 years, get verified, get issued, get rated, and get ready. And that is before 2030 comes along, because corporates are going to start thinking very hard in at least 27, 28. Yeah. As to what they need to meet the targets for 2030. So it's an exciting space, but we do need to mobilize that actually right now.
It's a good note to end on. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this panel and for being with us tonight. And I don't know if you've not had a chance to have dinner yet, so I won't keep you from your dinner for too long. Thank you very much. And thank you.
Thank you.
Ishika, Oyi, and Kavitha, thank you so much for that really great way to kick off our program tonight and the Sustainable Business Summit. And now we're going to shift gears and head to Thailand to talk about their transition to a low-carbon economy. So please join me in welcoming Niraman Laesa Atit, Executive Director and Senior Executive Vice President at Bangkok Bank.
Sawadee ka. Good evening, distinguished guests. It is my pleasure to be here with you this evening at Bloomberg Sustainable Business Summit. We have listened to the discussion about transition finance, APAC, markets in motions. And I do believe that ASEAN has many things to do, and we believe these regions will going to be better, and then we could grow together also. But first of all, I would like to step back to why we need the transitions. So if you look at these pictures, you will see that, like we have mentioned about, these are some of the recent climate, this year's, just only this year's, some of the recent climate events around the world. And wildfire in California, January this year, flood in New York City, large flood in Guizhou, southern China, forcing some 80,000 people to flee their homes. Floods in South Korea, and I think that last 2 weeks only, there's a big flood in Nans, in Thailand also. It will going to be the disaster to Thailand. So we have seen that there have been many events in a short period of times, causing loss of lives and economic losses that we have talking about the insurance, that we think that the insurance premium in the future, because of this disaster happens every year, and disaster coming large and large more in the future also. So the earth is sending us a signal, and something has been wrong that we have done. So we have to do many things, and the urgent things that we think is the transitions. As a result, I think that the government around the world have committed to mitigate global warming, setting carbon neutralities, and target net zeros. For ASEAN, you have seen that we have made commitment as well, depending on its own path, subject to the resources dependency, industry sector of each countries, funding and technologies gaps. To name a few, I think that Indonesia has pledged to achieve net zero emission by 2060. But if you look at Vietnam, Malaysia, and Singapore, that aims to achieve net zero by 2050. But if you look at Thailand, we aim to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and net zero by 2065. With targets in mind, Thailand's aim to have greenhouse gas emission peak this year and gradually decline to meet the carbon neutrality targets in 2050 and the zero target in 2065. The majority of the reduction you have seen, it will come from the energy. We have to admit that greenhouse gas emissions cannot be reduced to zero. So we have to absorb it through the trees and the forestation. So that's why we have to plant more trees. That the speaker has already talking about this, that today if we start grow the trees, it's going to be having some carbon captures in the next 5 years, something like that. So we have to think about it today. Then we also hope that the innovation and new technologies could be adopted to capture more carbons and reduce greenhouse gas more in the future. So if you have seen the green bar that Thailand has projected is the forestation that we had, and it could capture the carbons that we have to release in Thailand. So I just told you that in reality, we cannot reduce into zeros. So Thailand also, under the second national determined contributions, we have improved our plan. So the first plans, we were going to reduce just only 30% in year 2030. But in the second NDC for Thailand, we will reduce to be 40% in year 2040. And which sectors that we aims for? The first one is the energy. You have seen that the energy is the major sources of the carbon. So we have to make sure that we could reduce the carbons. And then what should we do? We have to increase our energy efficiencies and energy conservation, increase the shares of renewable energies, and phasing out coal, and limit new gas power plants. So this is the plan for Thailand also. And for the transportation, you may have seen about, we have the policies to be 30 at 30, aiming for automobile production in Thailand to be 30% electric vehicles to make our transportation greener. But I think that this electric vehicle should be not just only electric vehicle, we may aim for the HEV also to be 30 at 30. And then we have to improve our public transports and logistic efficiency also to make sure that we're going to reduce the cost of transportation by using fossil. For industry process, I think that this is something which is could reduce the carbon also. At the moment, emissions mainly come from cement, steels, and fuel combustion, in which we have to improve efficiency upgrades in factories, shift to low carbon fuel, and possibly green hydrogen in the futures. And we could be able to deploy carbon captures when the technology is viable. And the waste, you will see that we have so many waste from the, and then we have to make sure that we could do some more managements to make sure that utilize the landfill and then make sure that they will not create the methane. So this is something that Thailand is implementing this through the power plants, which is we are doing the waste and then produce the powers. For the first one that Thailand is doing is on the agriculture. You have seen that we try to improve our rice cultivation by using alternate wet and dry. So we have a lot of farmers in Thailand. So how to reduce the methane from the cultivation. So this is something that we try to do also. And then we try to encourage low carbon livestock systems. So this is something that Thailand tries to do. And if you look at these policies, Thailand just launched these policies on the January this year to make sure that we could be able to lower our carbon emissions. The first measure is to promote the installation of solar rooftops to residential homes up to 10 kilowatts through tax exemption up to 200,000 bahts. These measures will not only increase the use of renewable energies, but also reduce the household electric bill. Measure number 2 is to motivate factories, manufacturers, or any companies to invest in new energy savings equipments. This will going to give 1.5 times of investment cost as an expenses for tax calculations. So these measures are expected to stimulate investment in solar rooftop and energy efficiency to reduce energy consumption and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions also. Other than all those have been done, I think that the important thing that Thailand is trying to do is issue the Climate Change Act. Now it's still the draft. But in this draft, it's going to create something which is very good for the companies or the manufacturers to do also. The number one is the greenhouse gas mandatory reports that they have to do. The second one, they're going to have the emission trading schemes that we plan to do for also. And the carbon tax. We already implementing the carbon tax, but the tax that we done is just only for the carbon tax that we have done is for the oil tax only. Right now is 200 bahts. For the emission trading scheme, I think this is something that we think that it will going to be better for Thailand also in the futures. The carbon credit will be verified and offset to its corporate emission, also to others. So this will going to be the markets for Thailand to the tradings of the emission in the futures. And this scheme, if the act could be passed, this act will gonna be the mandatory after year 2030s for specific sectors such as power, generation, steel, cement, and transports to have cap on emissions. And if emission exceed allowance, it will gonna be need to buy carbon credits from others also. So I think this is something that has been announced from the Thailand's government. And then coming to the financial sectors, I think that on funding and investments, Thailand's financial market has continued as evolve also. We have launched so many things, including in year 2024, Bank of Thailand, in collaboration with 8 leading Thai banks, launched the Financing the Transition project to encourage Thai business to transition towards environmental sustainability. So this is the push to accelerate the business to transition. We also do believe that transition is not just an expenditure. It could reduce costs, create more value to customers' products, and increase competitiveness. So for Bangkok banks, we have long supported our clients in their sustainable and transition journeys. We work closely with our customers, provide guidance, and introduce loan products that will enable them to reduce their carbon footprint, adapt to climate change, increase their competitiveness, and progress along their transition journeys. On the product front, you will see that we have the product for the corporates and consumer also. The product for corporate will cover on the loans for greens, loans for solar, and loans for transitions. So all these loans has been program in some loans you're going to be in the product program to support SME, and some loan is something for like the environmental friendly real estates, which is to support the building who have the platinum or green leads. This is something that we also provided loan for also. On consumer, we also have Bo Luang Poon Phon green loans to upgrade their house with the green energies through the solar or others. So this is something that we have done for the past. And on capital markets, we also one of the major underwriters on green bonds, social bonds, sustainability bonds, and sustainability-linked bonds. So financing the transition will be the collective responsibility of both the public and private sectors. New capabilities, new skills are also needed, and commitment of customers from the tops is the key to make it happen. And finally, I think that each company would have its own path to follow. Sustainable investment should not be seen as a trade-off between profit and sustainability. We hope that we could work with customers on their journey, not just only a financier, but also their trusted partner and advisor. So I think this is the presentation that I have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nirman. I think some of those themes that you talked about, the intersection of government, financial sector, and consumers, are themes we're going to be seeing during tomorrow's plenary program. So thank you. And thanks to the rest of the team at Bangkok Bank, our Summit Advisor, for making tonight possible, as well as supporting our summit. As Ishika alluded to earlier, I will not stand between you and your dinners any longer. So please feel free to join us just outside. There's a buffet. You can bring your food back in here, eat and mingle. And we hope to see you all back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for the start of the Sustainable Business Summit. Thank you very much.